recording now. There we go. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight. We won't dwell along, but we've got a few little things to get through tonight, and we're very lucky to have Professor Dave Goulson joining us today as well. I'm going to stop sharing so you can actually see Dave as well, which we're very lucky to have. So just a few bits of housekeeping. I'll reiterate this as we get to the point, but we will be obviously having a Q&A session later on. At this point, all questions, whether it be at any point, you can start putting them in now. Please do put them in the chat box whenever you feel like it, and we can get those answered at the end if Dave is happy to. And then also during that, we'll also go to people with their hands up too. I hope that sounds okay to everyone. We're just going to go and quickly show the video that we had done by Jacob very kindly, documenting a bit of the Wild Gardens project, hopefully give you a little bit more insight into the project if you don't know much about it already. So with all things going well, it should pop up in a moment on the screen, and then the sound should play. So I'm going to mute and shut up for everyone else's delight, and enjoy. Please tell me if you can't hear it or see it.
We're in an ecological crisis, so for us it was really important in this area, which is so urbanised and it has so little green space, that we looked at the gardens. So the Wilder Garden project was born at the beginning of this year. This was a pilot project, and we didn't know how it was going to go. We couldn't find anybody else in the UK that was actually doing what we're doing and training the trainer and creating those champions actually embedded in their communities.
The flower. So this has just come in. Yeah, look. What would you put? This is a third. So you put one on as other flies, because it's not a hoverfly. So
we know that 97% of our flower rich grassland has disappeared since the 1930s, and what is left is fragmented and isolated. So if you think about all of those gardens all linked up into a habitat, that's a massive amount of land that we can really all do something about.
Thing going back from its head.
Oh,
That looks like it's been painted, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's been going.
Moths have been around for quite a long time. They've been around for about 190, 180 million years.
Wow.
This moth here is another moth that is a mimic.
What's it called? A buff
tip.
Buff tip.
Yeah.
It's like a birch twig, isn't it?
Yeah. Point it out to me when you see someone. Right. I'm not hearing anything, are we? This was absolutely alive. This was a couple of weeks ago. What we're really interested in is what types of bat are flying over our gardens. I'm going to play you a recording, and it will show you that there's a distinctive pattern to the sounds that they emit. That's what you call an arc. That's an arc, yeah? That's where they're flying.
Project swifts are in drastic decline. The numbers have more than halved in recent years. Some kind of development might be threatening the existence of those breeding pairs. You know, you can put swift bricks in, so there's going to be a home for nesting swifts. These local groups, they're great for the reporting and the data, and they're also great for organising. You know, if somebody notices all the scaffolding up on this building, on this road where we know there's swifts nesting on this road, maybe that's a chance to put some swift boxes up. Then you can club together and talk to people who live there, or talk to the council if you need to.
Through the project already, we have 27 Wilder Garden champions, and those champions are carrying on using the equipment for bugs and butterflies, bats, moths, and are actually sharing that with their neighbours. Their neighbours are wilding their gardens, providing forage for the swifts. The swift boxes are going up as we speak. Yeah, we really want this to continue. We want it to be year on year. Our vision is that we would have a champion in every street, and they come together on a Friday night and go out with their bat detectors and those moth traps, and so we really see that this is the foundations of a brilliant initiative, and we just want it to continue. I mean, climate change isn't going away, and we need as many gardens as we can wild, so we're really looking forward to next season, bringing in those champions and building on it, creating that network of people in the community, ambassadors for wildlife.
Right. I apologise for the volume with that. Unfortunately, the video is quite quiet for the most part, so there's very little that can be done about that. So sorry about that. I'm going to turn myself down so I don't deafen myself now, so I put my headset on full whack. I'm going to hand over now to Karen, who wants to talk a little bit more about the Wild Gardens project and what's occurring at the moment. Karen.
Hi everybody. Yeah, then that was really sad that we couldn't hear the video. Jacob, I just want to thank him. He's been utterly amazing at giving us hours and hours and hours of his time for free, filming all these amazing volunteers over the season and putting that together. And his whole documentary will be debuted on the 23rd of October at the Super Seed Swap. And I also want to thank all the other volunteers, particularly Steve Till, who, again, has been incredible at inspiring so many people with bats and moths. So, yeah, and I think the video, even though you couldn't hear it very well, clearly shows what we're trying to do is train people to inspire people to change behaviour in their neighbourhoods, which is slightly different to the national charities which are giving out that wonderful, amazing information about how to rewild. So, yeah, I think that's great, and I'm super excited that Dave's there. So over to you, Dave. Thank you.
If I could just quickly come in there, sorry to interrupt. The video is available on YouTube. I've popped the link in the chat, so you can actually hear it. Sorry about that. Sorry, carry on, Dave.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and thanks for inviting me to talk about. I'm really going to talk about mainly about insects and what we can do for them in our gardens, and why we should do something for them, because they need our help. So let me just get this to work. There we go. So I've been interested in insects all my life. I don't know why, but from the age of about 5 or 6 years old, I remember collecting caterpillars from the edge of the school playground on some weeds and putting them in my lunchbox and taking them home and rearing them up. And they were little yellow and black stripy caterpillars that turned into red and black moths, which I'm sure many of you will recognize as cinnabar moths. But I thought that was just amazing. And I've been hooked ever since. And I've been lucky enough to get paid to make a living out of it, which is out of chasing around after insects, which is a real privilege. My speciality are bumblebees. There's a lovely bumblebee on the left. I spent about 30 years studying bumblebees. I do think actually that most people go through a kind of bug phase when they're a kid, and it's really sad they grow out of it. This is my my youngest son, Seth, who's 11 years old at the moment, and he loves insects. I mean, obviously I do my best to encourage him, and I really hope he doesn't grow out of it. But most people do, and by the time they're teenagers or adults, their reaction to insects is often one of sort of fear and loathing, and they flap at them and try and kill them if anything buzzes near, which is really sad. So I basically spend my life trying to persuade people to love insects, or at least to respect insects for being really important. And because, as I've already mentioned, they need our help. There's abundant evidence that insects, sadly, are in decline. One of the best data sets in the world, actually, is from the UK butterflies, which are very carefully monitored by the Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. And so the monitoring started in about 1976, and they tend to divide it into two halves, the common butterflies and the rare butterflies, essentially. And you can see that both have declined, but particularly the rare ones. Overall, there are about half as many butterflies today as there were in 1976. Now, I was 11 years old in 1976, so I was the same age as my son is now. So he is growing up in a world where he sees half as many butterflies as I did when I was his age, which strikes me as really sad. Of course, it isn't just butterflies that are declining, and it's not just in the UK. This is an international phenomenon. One of the best bits of evidence that for insect declines came from Germany. It was published in a study, an academic study published in 2017, which was based on malaise trapping, was that funny tent-like thing is a malaise trap. And German insect fanatics have been putting these malaise traps on nature reserves all over Germany since the 1980s. And the graph shows you the weight of insects caught per trap per day on German nature reserves from 1989 to 2016. And it fell by 76% in 27 years. So 3/4 of the insects seem to have disappeared from German nature reserves. There's lots of other evidence as well. Sadly, we don't have actually really good long-term detailed monitoring like this for most insect groups. So for example, for bees, my favorites, we don't have as yet long-term data on their population trends. I actually helped to set up a thing called Bee Walks in 2007, which is run by the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, which is the beginnings, it's 14 years in, so the beginnings of a long-term population monitoring scheme for bumblebees. But it's a bit too early to say much about what it shows as yet. But for bees, we do have maps of their ranges, and we can see how those have changed over time. And some of them show really alarming declines. So, for example, this is the lovely bee, one of my favorite bumblebees, actually. This is the shrill carder bumblebee, which used to be found all over southern Britain and bits of Wales. But as time went on, it really hasn't done very well. And by the time I first got interested in bumblebee declines and what was happening with the rare bumblebees, which was about the millennium, about 2000, I saw my first one of these lovely bees on Salisbury Plain there. It was since 2000 when I saw it, that the Salisbury Plain population has gone extinct, sadly. So this bee is disappearing before our eyes. The Somerset Levels population that I've just put a ring around is also now right on the edge of disappearing. So this bee, it could go within 5 years, 10 years, who knows? But certainly these declines are carrying on. It's not something that happened historically. It's happening right now, and we need to do something about it because insects are hugely important. They make up the bulk of life on Earth. They more than 2/3 of all known species of animal and plant on our planet are insects. And of course, they're food for lots of other things. So they're kind of the base of the food chain. Lots of birds, bats, lizards, fish, amphibians eat insects. So they'll disappear if the insects disappear. And insects do a ton of other stuff too. They're pollinators, of course, which I'll come to in a second. They're biocontrol agents. They're recyclers of dung and dead bodies and dead trees and leaves and all sorts of other things. They keep the soil healthy. They distribute seeds. They're basically involved in more or less any and every process you can think of on land, which is why basically life on Earth would grind to a halt without them. But most of these things they do, they don't really get much credit for. But most people are completely oblivious to all of this recycling and all this other stuff that insects do. The one thing that has kind of impinged on the public consciousness is pollination. Thankfully, there's at least something for which people thank insects. It's incorrectly assumed that it's always done by bees. Many people think that pollination is done by bees, and of course it is, but it's also done by lots of other insects too, butterflies and moths and lots of different types of flies and wasps and beetles and so on, all busy pollinating our wildflowers. And I mean, globally, 87% of all plant species need pollinating by some kind of insect. No, by some kind of animal, I should say. And in the tropics, that might be a hummingbird or a bat or something. But in Europe, it's always an insect. So basically, most plant species rely on insects. And of course, most of our crops, 75% of all crop species. Oh, we've got a bit of an echo on here now. Oh, well done. Somebody fixed it. 75% roughly of all the crop varieties we grow in the world need insect pollinators to give a full yield. So if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have this, you know, the supermarkets wouldn't look so great. We wouldn't have strawberries and cherries and raspberries and apples and pumpkins and squashes and tomatoes and chili peppers, you name it, even coffee and chocolate depend upon insect pollination. So we really need to look after these insects. And to do that, we need to know why they're disappearing. And this is a bit of a long and messy subject. It's quite a big chunk of my book is about trying to understand and explain what we know about insect declines. But there's lots of drivers of insect declines, and I'm not going to go into tonight because it's a bit depressing. But basically, we've made most of the landscape pretty hostile to not just to insect life, but to biodiversity in general. And we need to do something about that. So what can we do? Oh, the good news is there is lots we can do. Unlike lots of these sort of big environmental problems, like, you know, rainforests being chopped down and burned, or the ice caps melting, or whatever, we can all get involved and do stuff, and we can see the benefits really quickly because insects live all around us. They're everywhere. They live in our gardens and local parks and road verges and so on. And simple things we can do will benefit them, and we'll see them turning up, feeding on the flowers we plant or whatever. So it's really kind of rewarding and empowering, I think, anyway. So what do we need to do? We broadly, so if we start top left, we need to make our gardens more wildlife friendly, more insect friendly, and I'll come back to that in a second. But then kind of going around clockwise, we also really need to think about how we can make farms more wildlife friendly so that they become more sustainable in the long term, because farming needs insects, it needs pollinators and all the other insects that do important jobs. We need to put more flowers back into the landscape. We need perhaps to try and restore some of the beautiful hay meadows that we lost so much of in the 20th century. We destroyed, used to have 7 million acres of flower-rich grasslands like that lovely hay meadow bottom right in the UK. We destroyed 97% of them in the 20th century. And we need to stop spraying everything with pesticides all the time, which to me seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. Anyway, back to the gardens. So there are about 22 million private gardens in the UK, covering an area of about 400,000 hectares, 1 million acres or thereabouts, which is a bigger area than all of our nature reserves. And just imagine if they were all filled with insect-friendly flowers, they were all pesticide-free with a little pond and a bee hotel and basically inviting nature in to live there. That would be fantastic, and it would really, really make a difference. Oh, just hang on a second. I'm just going to... Sephi, would you mind being quiet? I'm just giving a talk, sweetheart. Honestly, the perils of giving talks from home. If you could add in, you know, all the council-owned, all the urban green spaces, the road verges, the roundabouts, the parks, the cemeteries, and get all of those managed for wildlife as well. And that's like a national network of wildlife-friendly habitat. And this isn't just a sort of pipe dream of mine, and which I know obviously many of you share. It's already happening. There are groups like yours all over the country doing this right now, making their gardens more wildlife friendly and planting flowers on roundabouts and such like. So it's like an open door. It's already happening, and I think, you know, we just need to push it along and accelerate it as much as we can. You can probably tell I'm quite keen on this idea, which is why I've written books about it. Sorry for plugging my own books, but that's what you get if you invite me, I'm afraid. I won't tell you more about them. Actually, a lot of the material in them is in my YouTube videos, if you want more information about how to make your garden more wildlife friendly, or at least it shows you what I've done in my garden to make it more wildlife friendly. Gardens can be amazingly biodiverse. So there's this really interesting book by a lady called Jenny Owen, who lived in Leicester, in quite near the city centre in urban Leicester. And she had quite a small garden of about 1/8 of an acre. But she spent 35 years identifying every species of plant and animal she could find in her little garden. And 35 years, top marks for dedication. She managed to come up with a species list of 2,673 different species, of which 1,997 were different types of insect. But I just think that's extraordinary that, you know, 2,500 species in an urban garden is the kind of number you would expect from a rainforest or something. Anyway, so how do you maximize the number of species of creature that you can get in your garden? You need to grow the right kinds of plants, and there's lots of information out there about that. I haven't got time to go into it here, but broadly, native wildflowers mixed with cottage garden, old-fashioned varieties. It tends to be that perennials and biennials are better on average, although there are some exceptions. And herbs tend to be very good. As I say, you can get lots more information from my YouTube videos and the Gardening for Bumblebees book. What else can we do in our gardens? Well, starting again top left, we can be more tolerant of weeds. It's funny that you know, we're taught from an early age, if we're interested in gardening, that you know, a good gardener, a good gardener, his job is to get rid of weeds. You know, things like that. You're not a good gardener if your garden is full of dandelions and thistles. But actually, if you stop to think about it, dandelions, for example, are rather beautiful. They're native wildflowers. They're really important source of nectar for pollinators in the spring. So why do we spend so much time persecuting them? It seems a bit nuts to me. And I'd love it if we could persuade everyone to allow a few to grow and, you know, be a bit more tolerant. In fact, you know, you can get rid of all the weeds in your garden just like that by just calling them wildflowers. Then going around the circle again clockwise, flowering trees are fantastic for pollinators, particularly if you put in fruit trees that flower in the spring, if you've got room for them. And you can get ones on dwarfing rootstock that stay really small and suitable for a small garden. You know, apples, cherries, plums, pears, and so on, they provide this massive forage in early spring at a time when things like queen bumblebees are coming out of hibernation and they're starving hungry and really need some food. So that is well worth doing if you've got the space. And of course, the bees return the favor by giving you your own 0 food miles, 0 packaging, hopefully 0 pesticides, fruit at the end of the year. Then progressing round, this has become quite a thing in the UK in the last 2 years since lockdown. We should mow less. It's a really, really simple thing. If we've got an area of grass, of lawn, then reducing the frequency of mowing massively increases the wildlife value. So that's my lawn bottom right there. And I haven't sown any wildflowers or done anything much to it, other than I hardly ever mow it. And it's full of flowers. They just appear like it's like a miracle. My own wildflower meadow, and I didn't have to do anything to create it. It's brilliant. So next time you get the urge to mow, if you can just, you know, try and chill, get a deck chair out instead and make yourself a cappuccino or a gin and tonic or whatever, and just sit down and enjoy the wildlife. And of course, as well as domestic lawns, there are lots of mown areas in our towns. along the road verges and the roundabouts and the parks and so on. And they don't need to be mown all the time, just like our lawns. And many of them would seem like ideal places for planting wildflower meadows. So bottom left there is exactly that. That's actually a photograph I took up in the city of Stirling in Scotland, where there's this little campaign group called On the Verge that basically sow wildflowers and any bit of grass they can get their hands on. And so far they've done that in, I think it's 93 patches, so road verges, roundabouts, next to a rugby pitch, in a primary school field. Even in the women's prison, there's now a wildflower meadow, which is brilliant. And wouldn't it be great if every road verge, every roundabout looked like that? Would make a real difference. Instead, what you often see along road verges is the council spraying herbicides as well as cutting all the time. And this is something that drives me mad. You know, look top right there, that photograph of that silver birch tree. So this scorched vegetation, this has been burnt off by spraying with herbicide, almost certainly Roundup, which has the active ingredient glyphosate. So, you know, that little bit of vegetation around that silver birch tree, it wasn't doing any harm. It probably wasn't anything very exciting. It's probably mostly grasses, but maybe there was a dandelion or two. There would have been a few insects living there. And now the whole thing is dead. Looks awful. Why was that necessary? What harm was that little bit of life doing? And why do the councils pay with our taxes for people to tour the streets looking for anything green and killing it? It seems completely nuts to me. Anyway, and we also spray them on children's play equipment, as you can see in the middle and on the left there, which, considering there's another issue here relating to human health, there's quite a lot of evidence that glyphosate is a human carcinogen. And yet we spray it on our pavements, along the edges of paths in our parks, and even on children's play equipment. It just seems completely bonkers to me. So I think we should ban pesticides completely in urban areas for use by the council, for use in our own gardens. And if you think that's a bit extreme, the French have already done it. They banned urban pesticide use. They basically made it illegal for anyone to buy a pesticide unless they were a licensed farmer. So Paris, for example, is completely pesticide free now. And if Paris can do it, why can't we? I think it would be brilliant. One way or another, basically, we have to look after this amazing planet of ours. You know, it's an extraordinary thing when you think about it, this kind of rock hurtling through space with a little crust of life clinging to its surface, most of which is different types of insects. You know, it's extraordinary. It's our home. There is no planet B, as has been said many times. You know, we should value it above all else. And it's incredible that we're so careless with our environment. And there's a real danger that, you know, the future generations are going to inherit a really impoverished world. I think it's just bizarre that, you know, everyone would do anything for their kids apart from leave them a decent planet to live on. So we have to do better, and we can do better. And I think a really nice place to start is by looking after the stuff that lives in our gardens, all the little insects and so on, which is it from me. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Really, really enjoyed that. It seemed like lots of other people agree with that. I think if it's okay with you, we're going to move into some questions now, if that's okay.
Of course.
That's
what I'm here for.
Superb. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. That's the remainder of this session. It was intended to be mostly a Q&A session, along with a great talk from Dave. So absolutely. If you have any questions that you don't want to use the chat box, that's fine. Pop your hand up and we'll come around to you as well. I'll keep an eye on everyone and try not to miss you. If I do, then shout at me. By all means. So the first question I've had, also apologies to some people having sound issues then. I don't know what's going on with sound tonight, but it sounds like there's been a few different things going on. So the first question we had come in was when you showed the graph at the start of the presentation, was each line a different location?
Yeah, so the lines were joining dots that were data collected from the same site. Overall, it looks kind of messy, didn't it, that graph? But basically, the trend is is pretty clear.
Fantastic. And another one, of what use are mosquitoes?
Well, so I often get asked similar, it's either what use of mosquitoes or wasps or slugs or something that people don't like. And there's lots of options at that point. I mean, mosquitoes, they are food for bats. They're part of the food chain. But I appreciate they can be quite annoying. But I kind of think, we shouldn't have to find a use for every species that lives on our planet. There's probably lots of species that aren't any use to us. They don't do anything for people, but surely they've still got a right to live on our planet. We shouldn't just value bees because they pollinate and dung beetles because they get rid of dung, because there are probably loads of insects that actually aren't doing anything terribly important, but they're still amazing. They've probably been here a lot longer than we have. And like them or not, I kind of think it's a moral duty to look after the rest of the species on our planet. Just because we can destroy them doesn't mean we should or have the right to, I would say.
Yes, brilliantly answered. Absolutely. From Lucy, a friend said to me that one of the worst things we can do for insect populations is to start beekeeping and keep a beehive. Apparently, this is terrible for wild bee populations if too many people have hives. Is this true?
Yeah, it is absolutely true. And I've got nothing against honeybees or beekeepers at all. It's a lovely species and they're mostly wonderful people, but they feed on the same flowers that all the wild pollinators feed on. And one of the big problems in the modern world is there aren't many flowers, so there isn't much food for pollinators. And if you have a honeybee hive that might have 60, 70,000 mouths to feed in it, that they will take a lot of the pollen and nectar from the landscape. So unless you're also providing lots of food for them, you're basically reducing the amount of forage for other bees and butterflies and all these other insects that visit flowers. Somebody once calculated that you need about a hectare of really dense flowers to feed one hive. So if you've got that much land and you can plant it full of flowers, then have a hive. But you've got to do that for every hive you have. Otherwise, you're basically parasitizing the landscape to produce honey. So yeah, basically, honeybees are fine, but we just should avoid having too many of them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Karen is urging you to keep plugging, and she's read all your books and they're really inspiring. So that's cool. I need to pick up some copies then. So it's the sound issue. No problem in California. Hello to California, as you do. We've got any books on the psychology and history of various cultures of gardening that you could suggest?
Sorry, no, that's not really my area. I wish I could. Maybe someone else has an answer to that one. Please do type it in the chat box if you have some suggestions.
Or screen. You can unmute. Karen said, lots of wildflower verge colonization going on in the havens, but always lots of room for more. I agree. David said, only today I got a complaint from a resident asking why the grass has not been cut. Lots of people think leaving the grass to grow on wildflowers is untidy.
Yeah, this is a recurring theme, isn't it? It's like there's a sort of war going on at the moment between the people who want verges left for the wildflowers and cut perhaps once or twice a year, and the tidy brigade that have got used to them being tidy. They've always been cut all the time and they want that to carry on because they think it's laziness if they're not cut. We somehow need to persuade people. We need to explain to them that it's not laziness, that it's being done for positive reasons, and that bees and butterflies need our help. They need those flowers. And if you get any opportunities to explain that to someone who doesn't understand, then please do. And one thing that helps, of course, is to put up a little sign, make it obvious that it's an active choice. Wildflower meadow or wildflowers, or even a little explanation as to why it hasn't been cut, and stick that next to it. And that really, really helps. But it's all about education, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. I know that it's all about sort of changing mindsets. And I know it's something that the councils around, especially in New Haven, where we're trying to do more of, leaving verges or enhancing verges for pollinators and wildlife. So hopefully we'll see more of that soon. Leslie said it's interesting about Paris. We're struggling with these Sussex highways and their weed killer spraying. Oh God, tell me about it. Jenny says, how do you go about changing things at a governmental policy social consciousness level? I can't get my teeth in today.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew, to be honest. Clearly I haven't succeeded because look where we are. It's really difficult. It's very easy to give a talk or an event like this, but you're always preaching to the converted, and it's, the people we might want to reach tend not to pick up a book about bees or wildlife gardening or tune into a talk like this. It's really hard. I wish I knew. I'm often asked, but there is no sort of silver bullet. There's no, if I had some magic way of engaging with the broader community out there, including politicians, I would have done it. I guess we just all have to spread the word as best we can, to anyone we can. If we can each win over one person and they win over one person, then eventually everyone will agree with us. But it's frustratingly slow, it seems.
I think as well, supporting organisations that can put pressure on governmental organisations and even NGOs is very important, and have a chat with your councillors. A lot of them, from personal experience, do want to do good when it comes to changing things, but we need more backing to actually be heard, especially at town level. Wendy's just done exactly that. She said she put in a motion to East Sussex highways to stop using glyphosate. I'm not even going to try and say it. My teeth aren't in today. There's also a local Lewis petition that you can sign. Wendy, if you want to pop that in the chat, that'd be amazing. That'd be great.
I did start. There's a national petition running on the government website. If you Google ban urban pesticides, you can find it pretty easily. And it's got, I think, 38,000 signatures so far. I was really hoping we could push it up to 100, but that's looking a bit optimistic. But if anyone would like to sign it, please, please, please do.
That'd be really good. Get some signatures done. Simon says, any recommendations on bee identification guides and places where you can record bees you identify in your own garden or other local wild spaces?
So the best book is by Steve Falk, which is something like the Bees of Great Britain and Ireland or something like that, which covers all the British bee species in great detail and is beautifully illustrated. I could highly recommend that. There's lots of recording apps that you can upload data onto, which feed into national recording schemes. iSpot seems to be what, and there's what's the other one? My mind's going blank at the moment. I'll think of it in a minute and I'll let you know. But they do. Sorry, yeah, go on, George. You probably can think of some.
No, I'm no better.
Oh, okay.
To be honest,
it's iRecord, which is good.
Which one was that? iRecord. Okay.
Because it feeds into the apparently, doesn't it? The local ecologists who feed back to the councils.
Is this the one by chance we had at the network meeting spoken about a little while ago, wasn't it? I think this might be.
Yeah,
yes, it was.
Feed into the biodiversity records and the councils and everything.
Do that, you might see it. There we are. Oh no, I'll give up. Yeah, iRecord, Centre for Ecology and Hydrology on the App Store. That's a really good recommendation. Thank you for that. Another one, Kathy. If we set up bee boxes outside, is it absolutely necessary to bring them indoors to a shed or garage, or is it okay to leave them outside all winter?
Yeah, it's fine. I leave most of mine outside. I do put some, rather haphazardly. When I remember, I put some in the shed, and it doesn't seem to make much difference. The solitary bees that live in bee boxes, obviously, managed for millions of years without someone carrying their nests and putting them in a shed in the winter. So they seem to cope pretty well. I think actually the main motivation for putting them in the winter is more that your bee box will eventually rot if you don't do that. But if it's a sturdy one, it'll last quite a few years anyway.
Vanessa says, good time to sow yellow rattle. We tried sowing October, November last year and raised the lawn a little. Back-breaking raking. We'll try saying that with a speech impediment. But nothing came up this year. Should we try plugs as well as direct sowing?
Yeah, I mean, by all means, try plugs in the spring. The time you are supposed to sow is autumn. So October, November was correct. So it's frustrating that it didn't work. It's very hit and miss, yellow rattle, I must admit. I've tried many times and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The seeds need vernalization, they need frost. So if you sow them in the spring, they definitely won't germinate. They need to be, as well as when you sow them, you need to cut the lawn or whatever area really short, and you need to push the seeds down, trample them in so that they're firmly in contact with the soil. So maybe that would have helped. But whatever you do, it does seem to be quite erratic. But once they get going, they seem to come back every year, but it takes a few years often to get them off the mark.
That's really interesting, actually. You wouldn't think to sow seeds when there's a frost, but that's quite interesting. Simon says, on the Greenhavens Facebook, there have recently been shared photos and identification of some rare insects and other species in some of our threatened green places. Is there any potential for people power locally to record these species that helps argue to give them protection? Where should they be recorded for this purpose?
Well, so the iRecord and iSpot and so on, they do all feed into the national databases. But I mean, really, you're not going to get any extra protection unless an area is designated as in some way, for example, as a triple SI, which is quite difficult to do. Having one or two rare species won't cut the mustard. If you have a whole assemblage of rare species, then you could contact Natural England and ask that they come and have a look themselves, and they might consider it. But it's quite difficult to get that status. And even then, to be honest, the protection isn't amazing. So it is quite frustrating often that, there are lovely places that we know have quite a bit of wildlife, but really difficult to get any formal protection for them, sadly.
Yeah, it's really sad how many species just struggle for protection, even though they really should be. And we've got another one. Will farming insects help?
So I'm not quite sure. It depends what you mean by farming insects. So if people are suggesting insect farming as to provide human food, things like crickets and mealworms and so on. And actually there is some logic to that, because insects are much more efficient at turning stuff we can't eat into something that's nutritious for humans than are cows or pigs or whatever. But it's a hard sell. Most people don't really like the idea of eating insects. I don't think farming insects to supplement the wild population is really practical, because there's just way too many species. You could do it for one or two butterflies that you were particularly fond of or whatever, but it's the lack of habitat which is causing insect declines at the end of the day. So just breeding them and releasing them isn't really going to help.
Cool. Lucy's asking, I work in a garden which is open to the public, and we have a hornet's nest by the path. We want to welcome the hornets, but can we tempt them to a nest in a different spot next year, and how? Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, hornets are not aggressive. They're terrifying looking creatures, and I can understand, a hornet's nest sounds intimidating. But they compared actually to the smaller wasps that commonly come and sort of, try and steal our picnic food late in the summer, hornets never show any interest in human food and will not sting unless you really go out of your way to annoy them. But I do not know how the nests they die at the end of the summer naturally, along with all wasp nests do. And they very often don't come back to the same place anyway. but sometimes they do. And I guess the only thing you could do would be in the winter to block up the hole so that they can't get into whatever this place is that they're nesting at the moment.
Cool. Do you get pushback from people with allergies? I'm assuming pollen allergies, maybe?
No, that's not something, I must admit, I've ever really encountered. I mean, most pollen allergies, I think, are to grasses rather than flowers. So if you're encouraging, more wildflowers and flowery meadows and so on, I don't think you'd be making people's hay fever any worse. So no is the short answer.
Heather, to help relieve the despair of the government's new house building targets, I've been photographing insects around sites that may be turned into housing, e.g. New Haven Heights and the Brighton General Hospital, and recording on iRecord. We have found some really rare species, tiny beetles and furrow bees. It has really helped relieve the despair. It may not work, but it feels great to try and take some action. Greenhavens has helped inspire me more with this. I'd like us to have more biodiversity volunteer teams to get out there to places which are destined to become concrete blocks. I love that. That's great. David has hit the nail on the head. Your counsellors are here. They are indeed. There's quite a few of us in here, actually. So we are listening. We're trying. I promise you that. And there we go. Jesse has shared the Parliament petition. Thank you for that, Jesse. There we go. iNaturalist is another app to record and help ID. And then there's some, there we are. So Karen has said, Greenhavens Wild Gardens project is attempting to be in for the long haul. We are trying to inspire people to change behaviour, which I think sounds like is happening from what we've heard tonight, which is fantastic, by giving residents the skills to look at bats, insects, moths, and having the moth traps in people's gardens this season, inviting their neighbours has gone down really well. I'm going to learn how to speak today. Thank you, Leslie, for sharing the link to the glyphosate petition. And there's another one there as well. We often ask about the role of certain insects. I often wonder about the functions of humans within nature. Has your life work shed some light on this?
There's a lovely quote from an American biologist called E.O. Wilson, who's an insect expert. I can't remember it in full, but he basically says that if the insects were to disappear, the environment would collapse into chaos, I think he said. But if humans were to disappear, nature would do really nicely without us. And it's certainly true that if we were to somehow miraculously disappear, life would recover, species would come back, the amazing bioabundance that used to live on our planet would return. So what use are we? I mean, obviously, as individuals, we can behave differently. We can do things that help biodiversity, and I guess everyone here wants to do that. So although the human race may be doing a lot more harm than good at the moment, I guess the challenge is to find a way to end that and live alongside nature, as part of nature, rather than endlessly killing and destroying as we are at the moment.
Oh, that'd be great, wouldn't it, if everyone could learn how to do that? Well, we're getting there with Wilder Gardens project is certainly promoting that. And also your work, Dave, as well, is quite at the forefront of that among many other organizations. So all we can do is keep trying. Lucy said, will there be a follow-up study to Dave's testing of supposedly RHS pollinating plants sold at supermarkets and DIY stores and certain garden centers which contained pesticides? Interesting to know if the ones that changed did stick to that change, and if the others, I think B&Q, changed their ways. This has come up a few times, actually. It's always an interesting one.
Yeah, we haven't repeated the work yet. I mean, so basically all the big garden centre chains and DIY stores agreed to phase out neonicotinoids, which is this particular type of insecticide that are especially poisonous for insects. But that was in 2017. But then, kind of ironically, the European Union banned them anyway in 2018. So the effort was perhaps unnecessary, as it turned out. But nobody has checked to make sure that they are gone. It's unfortunately the chemist at Sussex University that I worked with who did that analysis has retired. So we're currently unable to do it at Sussex. There are labs around the country that could do it, but we can't. I'd really like to see what's in there at the moment. The bigger issue is that there were loads of other pesticides in ornamental flowers on sale in garden centres. And I think in a sense, it was a bit of a shame that it was Friends of the Earth that used our data to campaign to put pressure on the garden centres to get rid of neonics. But I tried to persuade them that they should be, if a plant is going to be sold by a garden centre as bee friendly or pollinator friendly, it shouldn't have any pesticides in it. It shouldn't just be free of neonicotinoids. It should be free of, well, certainly insecticides. And to my mind, it should be free of all pesticides. And that definitely isn't the case. They only promised to get rid of the neonicotinoids. So there'll be other insecticides that have taken their place, sadly.
Certainly sounds almost like mis-selling a product, doesn't it, as being bee friendly, but actually it could do more harm than good in a way. Vanessa has shared what looks to be a great book, The Field Guide to the Bees of Great Britain and Ireland. So it's worth having a look at. Janine, is there anything you can do to encourage bats to your area?
Ooh, I'm not a bat expert, it must be said. I mean, obviously bats feed on insects, so the more insects you have, the more likely there are to be bats. I'm not an expert on bat boxes, but I'm sure there's information out there online about bat boxes, and they seem like fairly simple constructions to make, and probably worth having a try. But I don't know if have we got any bat experts on here who might give more detailed advice than that?
Feel free to shout. If you put it in a chat box, I won't see it for 35 messages. So
the Mammals Trust, I think, are pretty good. But I think there is also the Bat Conservation Trust, isn't there? I believe. I've never had much involvement with them, but they would seem like obvious people to contact.
It's worth adding as well, admittedly putting another hat on, that the RSPB website has some schematics on how to make bat boxes, where to position them and how to attract bats, including certain planting techniques. So that might be something to have a look at as well. So yeah. Karen, while the Gardens Project are recording locally, the one thing we've realised is that everyone who sends the records in, which is brilliant for development, etc., doesn't though let locals know what is living where. We're trying to do this locally through the scheme in partnership with the University of Sussex. Julie, how do you personally feel the last 18 months, 2 years has affected wilding? Obviously because of the obvious.
Yeah, well, so regardless of COVID, the rewilding or wilding or whatever you want to call it is all the rage, isn't it? I mean, it's been really exciting to see the attention that NEP has got, and there are a whole bunch of other big rewilding projects that are already underway, dotted around the country. There's a huge one in Norfolk, I believe, which is a couple of years in. So I think that's really exciting. But at the same time, there's this sort of micro rewilding, or whatever you want to call it, urban rewilding, people making their gardens more wild, which is, whether it's correct to call it wilding is a matter of opinion, I guess. Nobody's releasing wolves in their back garden. But it's definitely, that was really affected by lockdown, wasn't it? I mean, I think, because councils stopped mowing in the spring of 2020 last year, because of lockdown, they couldn't mow. And suddenly we saw road verges full of orchids and all sorts of flowers that we'd never realized were there, because they were just being mown to death all the time before, in previous years. And lots of people got really excited by that, and have then tried to put pressure on the council to not revert to the old mowing regimes. And it's been variably successful. Some councils are back to behaving as they always did, and others have got new, much reduced mowing regimes, and that's brilliant. And also this year and last saw No Mow May became a kind of a hashtag that was trending on social media and so on. So lots of people in their own gardens were posting pictures of their shaggy lawns full of flowers and so on, which is, I think, is brilliant. We don't need all these bloody boring mown lawns everywhere and mown road verges and all the rest of it. So it definitely, lockdown had some benefits. Long may they persist, I would say.
Absolutely. I'm going to speed through a little bit now because time is cracking on. And I don't want boredom to set in too much. Karen's asked, how do wild garden folk cope when we're terrified of spiders? Although that sparked a debate because spiders are amazing, apparently, and they're pretty cool, but they're a bit scary. So any recommendations on getting over the fear of spiders?
Not really. I mean, I have to say, I used to be frightened of spiders, and I seem to have just grown out of it, thankfully. I think I learned it from my mum, who was, to this day, is absolutely terrified of all spiders. And I think it took me a few years to get over that kind of childhood indoctrination. But they're amazing things. We need to somehow, get over that. But I don't have any magical way of doing it, I'm afraid.
A good way I find to get over it is go up to a web with an electric toothbrush and just watch them jump out of all the crevices. That's something that will get you used to them a bit more. Karen says, "Oh, we got less questions than I thought. Sorry, shouldn't we had more than we did?" That was my thing going batty. Funnily enough, Sussex Bat Group support the Wilder Garden project, and Jessie is awesome with bats. So that's someone to talk to maybe as part of the team. Heather. Maybe to help with spider phobia, going out as a group might help, and learning about them, seeing them, learning lots of amazing spider facts and the rare spiders locally too in New Haven, for example. A spider walk next year, maybe. Oh, that'd be pretty cool. I'm up for that. I see all the 8 legs. Karen said, I've had many professional heated debates in regards to the downs. In my mind, it should be full of wildflowers, scrub and trees, but other professionals will say the opposite. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a slightly tricky and controversial one. I mean, there's no doubt at all that the flower-rich downland that we kind of really value, that's so biodiverse, is maintained, was created by human action, by clearing the trees that would have historically been there, and by grazing mainly with sheep over hundreds of years. And if you don't do anything at all to chalk downland, it will eventually become basically forest. It needs some kind of grazing action or cutting to maintain it as that flower-rich grassland. But what proportion of it should be maintained like that is up for grabs. And you could argue, if you wanted to, that, well, before people came along, there would have been more trees growing on the downland, but then the rewilding folk would come along and argue that actually historically, before people were here, perhaps the downs were kept open by short-tusked elephants knocking trees over and grazing and so on. So it's really complicated, and there basically isn't a right answer as to what it should look like. I think for me, we need to look after the flower-rich grasslands that we've got, but I'd love to see. Unfortunately, the very large proportion of the downs are intensively farmed, and the soils are very thin. They're not really suitable for arable farming. You have to put loads of fertilizer on to grow anything much at all, which then all rushes off and damages streams and so on. I'd love to see much more of the downs turned back over to nature rather than being intensively farmed. Regardless of exactly, and then we'd have enough land to have some of it as scrub and trees and some of it as open grassland, and plenty of room for nature generally. But obviously, winning the battle and converting farmland to nature reserve is difficult, and we do obviously need to also grow food. So there's a counter argument there. It's complicated, isn't it?
There's so many different things to think about. Jesse, I completely agree. Definitely more hedgerows, landscape trees, mosaic and corridors. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be brilliant. Do we have any more questions anyone wants to shout out or whack in the chat before we start to wrap up at all? I'll give another couple of seconds. Julie, you've got your hand up. You're muted, Julie. There we go.
Yeah,
Spot on.
sorry, I did put one in the chat, but
Did
it
you?
was
Oh,
just to
sorry.
say, oh no, that's okay. It was just to say, over the summer, I was listening to the Radio 2 promotion of the, with regard to bees and habitats, and they went to, you know, different places, flats and, you know, created mini gardens as well as normal gardens. And they asked them, you know, they asked the children to create their own wild gardens. And I just wondered if you thought that was the way forward to try and promote it to a wider range of people.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. That, I mean, Radio 2 has something like 4 million listeners. So the fact that they ran it's going to run again next year, apparently, probably as well. But they ran this kind of running theme through the summer mainly on the Zoe Ball breakfast show. And part of that was a competition for kids to enter to design a bee-friendly garden, and then the winner, it was created for real. Fantastic, you know, getting kids thinking about what we can do to make gardens more wildlife friendly, more insect friendly, is just brilliant. And you know, the more the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Fantastic. What else do we have here? Top 5 recommendations for the layperson to do at home for bees. Love it.
Oh, well, start with, you know, some bee-friendly flowers. And as I said, there's loads of advice out there, but you know, top bee-friendly plants: catmint, comfrey, lavender, marjoram, viper's bugloss. So plant some good flowers. Don't use any pesticides in your garden, please. It just, as I said, it's just nuts. You don't want poison in your garden. What's the point? It's mad. Put up a bee hotel. Leave your lawn unmown or unmown for as much of the time as you can bear, and that would probably do it, really. I can't. That's only 4, but lots of flowers, and really the bees will look after themselves.
Just love how beautifully simple it is to help wildlife, and yet it's always overcomplicated. Why? It doesn't need to be. Layperson can do anything. I often say to people, just leave your garden. It's the easiest thing you can do. Just leave it. Lucy, are any wildflowers suitable for growing in deep shade? Of course, if weeds are wildflowers, then the range is vast. I work in horticulture, and it seems most flowers in shade are white, but bees prefer purple. I have people ask me about this, about their shady gardens. Put your teeth in.
Yeah, I mean, there are native foxgloves, for example, that thrive in shade. Things like comfrey, which now whether comfrey is truly native or not is debatable, but will happily grow in part shade. Aqualegias will grow quite well in shade, and they're brilliant for bees. Yeah, I'm sorry to keep plugging my books, but
go for it.
Gardening for Bumblebees has lots of suggestions, and wherever you can, you know, if there's a native wildflower suitable and that suits the spot, go for native rather than non-native as much as possible.
Brilliant, love it. Simon says, read Radio 2 makes you wonder about Greenhaven's connections to schools in our patch. I think there was some engagement in that one. I don't know if anyone wants to come in on that one. Karen or Leslie or no?
Jesse's sorry, it's Leslie. Jesse's just put a comment about the skate sculpture park at the sidings.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone had anything about the schools stuff, but that's okay. Yeah, that's great, Jesse. Yeah, absolutely, it's something to look into. I think that'd be fantastic to get involved in, either as a council, as a community, or as Greenhavens. There's various different things to do with that one. How do you feel, Dave, about the future for our insect species in the UK? Do you despair sometimes or have hope?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that really, because I do think it's going to get a lot worse. But that's no reason to give up. You know, we mustn't despair, because if we do give up, then it'll get really bad. And there's no doubt at all. everything we can do will make things less bad than they might otherwise be, which might seem like a kind of backwards way of viewing it, but it works for me. And you know, sadly, there's no doubt that we're not going to fix the problems we've created terribly quickly, and climate change obviously is going to rumble on, and many of the other things we're doing, we don't show much sign of reining in anytime soon. So, but you know, we've got to fight, and that's why I'm here. That's why you're all listening. You know, if we all do our bit, it'll make things better. Brilliant.
Thank you. And on the previous point, I think that's what Leslie was referring to, and I completely glossed over, so I do apologise. A couple of Wilder Gardens champions will be working with schools in Peacehaven and New Haven. That is great stuff. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Yes, more youth work, family engagement, always a good thing. Jenny's recommended a great shade mix, and she's put the link in there. And Lucy says, I'll get the book. Thanks, Dave. So informative. And thanks, Greenhavens. Always brilliant. Oh, that's lovely. Do we have a final call for questions? And then we'll move on. If not, one final call. And there's a couple of community gardens on the cards. Absolutely. There's the spot on there. A few more happening, which is always positive that there's a hunger for getting involved as a community, which warms me up quite a lot. I do like that. I'm going to assume then that's a no. In which case, I'm going to hand over to Julie, the chair of Greenhavens. Julie.
Lovely. Thank you, George. So it's my pleasure to be able to say our thanks this evening. I've got two people to thank. So Professor Dave Goulson, thank you so much. It's been such an honour for Greenhavens to host you this evening. We really appreciate your time and also sharing all of your knowledge with us. We could have carried on with our questions for you all night, but we won't do that to you, I promise. We've learned so much this evening, and I hope that even if we take just one thing from your words, we will endeavour to improve our own small environments. It is so important that we each take responsibility for our actions and inactions with regard to our green spaces, and I love the fact that so many young people are now involved. I'm sure this evening has inspired us all, and so thank you once again for taking the time to be with us. So thank you to yourself. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Karen for arranging this event and inviting yourself to come, because it has been very inspiring, and we've all thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Brilliant. I think that calls everything to a close, unless anyone else has any final words. Brilliant. I think we've done it. There's a load of thanks coming in for Dave. So honestly, thank you very much for that, Dave. Really insightful, really
Pleasure,
interesting.
honestly.
And yeah, we'd love to have you back down the line. I think Julie summed everything up perfectly there. In which case, I'm going to end the recording there. Everyone have a fantastic night, and we'll hopefully see you again at our next event or meeting or something, whatever comes next.